class. Today we're going to look at challenge 3. I know it's quite challenging compared to other activities because it's the first time we're going to look at two view controller .swift files and creating global variables. But don't be worried about challenge 4 or any of the subsequent activities. They're going to be much simpler. This one's the only one that requires some complexion on behalf of Xcode. So I'm going to start off with two views. I have not connected any of the objects. I've just added one label for the title, well, two labels here. One label for each of these, 4 text fields, a segmented control, and 2 buttons, one to take us to the results and one back. We can actually start control clicking results, so we get shown this once we click results, as well as clicking back. Well, that's kind of slow. There we go. Okay. So right now we're just using one view controller. As you can see, view controller.swift. And if we were to go to the programming part of our view controller.swift file, it's the same code in both views. If we go to this one and this one, view controller.swift, we want to change this to being independent from each other and having a view controller 2.swift. So we have to go to File, New, File, click the default option called Cocoa Touch class, and in this subclass look for UI View Controller. Instead of being called View Controller, we're going to name it View Controller 2. We're going to click Next and Create. So we've just created a new View Controller.swift file right here. But now we have to link it to our view. So we're going to go back to our main.storyboard, click on our second view, and we're going to head over to our utilities pane, and third option from the left, there is a part called class. We're going to change this class into viewController.2. And if I were to put my mouse over the view controller, it will display viewController.2. And if I look at the code, it's going to display viewController2.swift instead of viewControllers.swift. Great. So that's the big first step. Now we can start creating our connections. So as always, just control and dragging. I'm going to name this text name. This one text math. Let's name our segment seg program, maybe. Program. And our button results, which is an action, and UI button. Connect. Great. So what are the things we need in order to create an acceptance speech or rejection speech? Well, we need to know if the person had a pass or failing grade, whether they are in a traditional or cultural program, and we need to tell them their name in the speech. So we're going to create those 3 global variables. So one for var variable, name equal to an empty string. We're just saying that name is a string. Var program or program type, we're going to make it equal to empty string because it's either traditional or cultural, which we're going to define later on. And var pass grade, make it equal to false. So as a default, they're not passing. Great. After that, we have to create our constants from our texts. So let's make one for language, which is going to be equal to text language. Dot text. However, we want the integer of whatever the user inputs here. So we have to convert it into an int and put the according exclamation marks. Next, math equals to and finally physics perfect. Next up, we get the same usual type of error that is referring to we haven't used any of these constants before. We can just ignore those. So next up, we can get over into our ifs. Before I move to ifs though, I want to change the variable name into whatever the user input here, so text name dot text. Great. And my other variables, what I want to do is I'm going to reset them. So some students were having some problems with the programming, remember what they last wrote in a functioning emulator. So we can put program type just to make sure. It's going to be equal to nothing, and pass grade is going to be equal to false. We're going to change it to true whenever the sum of these are greater than, let's say, 600. We're going to see it up next. So I'm going to make some comments here. In this comment, creating constants. In this comment, resetting variables. And in this one, we're going to create traditional. We're going to code for traditional starting with an if. So if seg program, this thing, is set to 0, not 1 or 2, 0, segmented, then we're going to open up our brackets. It means it's traditional. We want to check now that the user is either passing or failing. So then if language plus math plus physics is greater than, let's say, 600, then we open our brackets. Pass grade is going to be equal to true. So to recap, we're going to make a test to see if the user clicked traditional. Then we're going to, if that is true, then it's going to go on to the next if, which is going to check that the sum of these three is going to be greater than 600 in order to change pass grade, the global variable stated here, from false into true. Great. So we can count our brackets and move on to the next one, which is cultural. So cultural basically is going to be exactly the same thing. We can either copy and paste it or write it down once more. However, instead of being 0 for the selected segment index, it's going to be 1. And the only thing we're going to change here is the 1, because we're referring to the cultural program. And let's say cultural program is going to be a little bit tough to enter, so a 700 grade instead of a 600 grade. And that is it. We're just changing pass grade to true if they're passing, and just checking what they are, what program they're applying to. One thing we forgot is just to add our program here, our global variable program type. We're going to set it here equal to traditional. And in this one, program type equal to cultural. So now we have our program type, our name, and if it's either passing or failing, true or false, and pass grade. The three things we need to move on to the next view. In the next view, we have to start by creating a connection for our label. We're going to name it label result. And there's a lot of text here, a lot of comments. We can delete those. We can look at what is viewDidLoad. viewDidLoad, as you can see in this comment, is whenever we change into this view, anything that's inside this function or this thing is going to run. That code is going to run. So we can delete that code, and we're going to create our code inside our viewDidLoad as if it were a button. So in here, we have to, sorry about my voice, we have to check if program type is equal to traditional. I'll put a comment here, traditional. If it is, we're going to open a bracket, check if it's either passing or failing. So if pass grade equals, we're requiring to true. If that is true, then we have to change label result dot text to the formal letter acknowledging that that person got accepted into the traditional program. So we're going to write dear, comma, the name of the person, and to write that we write in the variable name, which is name, but if we were to run this, it would just say dear name. We want it to say whatever the user inputted in text name on the first page here. So we're going to put dear and a / parentheses name inside. As you can see, it changes name. It changes color, I'm sorry. Comma. And we're going to put something like, thank you for applying to Tech University. We are happy to accept you into our traditional program. See you next fall. Great, so we have our acceptance speech for our traditional program. So if it's not a pass grade here, it means it's a rejection letter. So we're going to put an else statement here, open a bracket, click enter, and we're going to change the label result dot text into a rejection letter. Dear name, we are sorry to inform you that you did not qualify for the traditional program's requirements. Okay, so we have an acceptance speech for traditional program and our rejection. Now we just need to do the same thing for cultural. So here we have the end bracket for our if in traditional, and we can either put an else, because if it's not traditional it means it's a cultural program, or we can write an if statement altogether. So I'm just going to write an if statement altogether. I'm going to put cultural here, and if program. We can actually just copy the whole entire thing here, which is really easy for me to do. Just look out for your brackets. I'm going to paste it, and it's instead of traditional, it's cultural, and instead of traditional here, cultural and cultural, and that is about it. So we're just checking this and displaying the result in this label. One thing I forgot to do with this label, which many of you I think also forgot, was to go to the properties and adding multiple lines. Because if we do not add multiple lines, there will be just one single line with our acceptance or rejection speech. So let's try out our program in an iPhone 8 emulator. So while that is loading, I want to talk about challenge 4. It's going to be way more simpler than challenge 3, what we're doing right now. What you have to do, we just have to create a calculator, a body mass index calculator in one single view, no 2 view controllers or anything like that, and definitely no global variables. So you don't have to worry about these things for the tests next week Friday. Let's try out our app. Let's say I had an amazing score here in the traditional program, and I get an acceptance speech. Let's try now a horrible. I flunked everything in the cultural, and I get a rejection speech. And that is about it. For next Friday, we're gonna take challenge 4, which is the partial exam, and we're just gonna focus on what we looked here in embedded ifs, or an if inside an if. That is the most important thing you have to recall for the partial exam. Thank you.